A very good morning, Easter Monday. My name is Miah and these are Recusant 9 transmissions. Yesterday was Easter Sunday and I decided I wasn't going to put in the 8 hours necessary to put the transmission on. So my apologies to those of you who were expecting a transmission on Easter Sunday. I try not to do one on 4 days of the year if they fall. Christmas Day if it falls, Easter Sunday, and Eid if they fall on one of the days of the transmission. So those are the 4 days of the year I try not to, and I also try and avoid my birthday, my daughter's birthday, if they happen to fall on a Sunday, so people know beforehand. These transmissions are only possible with your support. If you find value in my work, please consider taking out a subscription on the web page. I am losing numbers by the day, and I'm losing numbers by the day because all of my work is put out for free. So that's what's going on. Some people are what they are, and who am I to judge or pass comment? But if you find value in these transmissions and you don't subscribe, please do consider taking out a subscription, or at the very least buy me a coffee when I am on, or if you can't even do that, there's a like button on your screen. At least like the posts. But hey, we are where we are. I need to talk to you about Failsworth. It's something that I've been privy to for some time because I've been actively involved in attempting to keep things on track, and I've been actively involved as a consequence of requests from both the leader of the Failsworth Independent Party, BRIAN HOBIN, and also from Mark Wilkinson, Sandra, and his wife, Mark's wife, Kath. So I've been involved that way, and I've also been involved because my friends in Failsworth have asked me. Dean Ludford, who normally watches, and of course David Gidman, who contacted me again yesterday. Now, I take no joy in this whatsoever, and my aspiration is that this can and should and must be resolved, because the consequences are far worse. The consequences of what will happen if we don't fix this are far worse. Now, before I launch into what's gone on, I think it's essential that we start with where we have come from. Not just in Failsworth, but across the town, because what the Failsworth Independents do and what happens in Failsworth actually leads the way for the rest of the borough. The independents elsewhere have drawn their strength from the achievements of the Failsworth Independent Party, and they have been a leading light across the borough, which is why, another reason why I am disheartened and despondent by what I have seen take place ahead of me. In 2018, there was a by-election in Failsworth East. In November 2018, there was a by-election in Failsworth East. It was a day of reckoning, really, for Failsworth. For me, it was a day of reckoning for Failsworth, and I'll just bring it up so you see it. Failsworth East by-election, Thursday the 29th of November 2018. Elizabeth Jacks got elected with a pitiful 677 votes. The opposition was the Conservatives with 336 votes, and Paul Goldrig, who's now standing in Royton North, was the UKIP representative. He got 32 votes. The Lib Dems crossed the line with 18 votes. There were 4 ballot papers rejected. And the turnout, as you can see, was pitiful. The turnout in total was just over 1,000 votes. Yeah, you can see that. The turnout was just over 1,000 votes. Following that election, a woman called Kath Wilkinson started to mobilise what eventually became the Failsworth Independents. And I have my ups and downs with Kath. The last time I saw her, I was sat in Morrison's coffee shop trying to make sense of a conversation or an exchange. And I asked Kath to shut up for a minute. And she reacted and responded in the way I knew she would do, which was to speak at me some more. But the truth is the Failsworth Independents would not exist if it had not been for the drive, direction and commitment of Kath Wilkinson, who mobilised Failsworth. Let's be very clear here. The Failsworth Independents would not exist, and the opposition in this town would be nowhere if it had not been for Kath Wilkinson. And it's easy to judge from the outside and criticise, and we all have our faults. But the starting point has got to be what Kath did. And then we moved just less than 6 months from that November by-election to May. Just less than 6 months. And this is what happened in Failsworth. (2019) the 2nd of May 2019. BRIAN HOBIN, as an independent, come out of nowhere, come out of absolutely nowhere, and gets more votes in one sitting than all of the candidates did in the previous election. 1,347 votes, and he took out Paul Jacks. So of the husband and wife Jacks team, he took out the husband. Out of nowhere. And that's because Failsworth mobilised behind the work that Kath Wilkinson led. And the consequence of that was 2 years later, because we didn't have an election in 2020 because of COVID. But in 2 years' time, in Failsworth West, sorry, my fault, just give me a second. In Failsworth West, Mark Wilkinson comes out of nowhere with the newly formed Failsworth Independent Party, which had evolved from Kath's thinking, and Kath did all the work. Let's be clear on who did all the form filling, who did all of that. It's Kath Wilkinson. They come out of nowhere and they get a record-breaking 1,472 votes in Failsworth West. And Mark Wilkinson, a very, very decent man, gets elected. 1,472 votes, and he takes out the machinery of the Labour Party and ousted, at the time, leader of the Labour Party, Sean Fielding, with 1,472 votes. In Failsworth East that year, in 2021, Neil Hindle gets elected with a massive 1,765 votes. These types of votes and the turnout is what I expect to see in the Asian areas. Such a way as the white working classes in Failsworth being mobilised behind the tireless work of Kath Wilkinson. Neil Hindle elected with 1,765 votes and takes out Liz Jacks. And the following year, in 2022. So last year, in Failsworth East, Lucia Ray gets elected with 1,502 votes. No one in sight. And in Failsworth West, Sandra gets elected with 1,390, with Peter Davis, the current Labour Party councillor, ousted with 973 votes. And out of nowhere, and from nowhere, 5 of the 6 councillors in Failsworth are the Failsworth Independents. And then the silliness started. But before we get to the silliness, in the lead up to this year's election, the Failsworth Independents had 2 administrative tasks to undertake because they're a registered party. One was an AGM, and there were moves to remove Kath Wilkinson from the position of party leader or party chair. I'm not sure which one, but party leader. And in any functioning democracy and functioning party, there should always be checks and balances. And now I'm sharing my opinion. There should always be checks and balances. The party chairman should be someone different from the party leader in the council chamber. And they don't need to always agree. But that's how it should be. Hearing that she was going to be ousted, Kath Wilkinson stepped down. From a party she had built from nothing, and under whose leadership they had taken out 5 of the 6 Labour Party councillors, thumped them, given them a sort of hiding that people in towns and cities across this country can only dream of. 5 of the 6 Labour Party councillors had been demolished, and Failsworth was on the verge of becoming not just completely FIP, Failsworth Independent Party, 6 candidate councillors, but from their work, an inspiration to the independent movement across the town. And likewise, in the council chamber, young women like Lucia, new councillors, were standing up and bravely putting forward motions. I'm not rewriting history here. Go and look at my transmissions and you'll see my admiration for the young woman and the others. And during that time, because I'm not rewriting history, my initial fallout with the Failsworth Independents is therefore all to be seen. It factored around 2 issues. One was they were clearly not reading the paperwork that the council was sending out. But that can be forgiven. They're learning. And I perhaps shouldn't have criticised them on that. And if I did, I shouldn't have criticised them publicly. I should have had the conversations with them privately. Which is why afterwards I reached out to them and I apologised. Because I'm that sort of man. On the second one, and I put out a transmission called The Betrayal of Hope at the time, it was my disappointment. It was my disappointment at how BRIAN HOBIN had met with, in his capacity as leader of the Failsworth Independents, met with Arood Shah, who'd had me arrested maliciously, falsely at the time, remember? Claimed I was a racist far-right activist. He'd met with her at some pub, and then he turned up at a council meeting and signed a pledge. And then local Oldham Times ran with it. It's still there, and you'll see it. where it essentially not just attacks me, but attacks all of you who follow my work. Now I understand why Brian did that. And again, I have no issue with that. I've come out the other end, and in all of this, it won't be the first time or the last time someone's stabbed me in the back. I'm all right with that. I know what my role is here. It doesn't matter. What matters is you, what matters is our towns, and what matters most of all is our children. What Brian was trying to do was form some sort of, clumsily, by the way, because of his inexperience, some sort of partnership, an arrangement, not just with Arooj Shah, who was leader of the council, but more so, I think, with the council chief executive and the senior leadership team who, and it must be challenging, it must be extremely difficult to be treated the way you are treated if you're an independent councillor in that council chamber. Because the Labour Party politicians and the Lib Dem politicians won't work together with the council officers because they don't want anything to change. And of course, Brian got his arse handed to him by Arooj Shah in the way she responded. Well, I'm all right. You live, you learn, you move on. And we all make mistakes. It's a political journey, and we all make mistakes. So I don't hold that against Brian at all. Now, in the lead up to this election, and I share this with all of you regularly because I laugh. It's the worst coffee I drink. My friend, David Gidman, I call him my friend, and also my friend, Dean Ludford, who have been turning up to all of the other independent events. You've seen them in Royton, you've seen them in Shaw, you've seen them in Coldust, you've seen them in Chadderton. Across the board, they're supporting. And Dean did much of the groundwork of what became the Failsworth Independent. So I meet with these lads for a coffee in Morrison's in Failsworth. 1:30, randomly, David will give me a call and I'll drive down to Morrison's, sit down, have a natter. It's good for my mental health, if I'm honest with you, going out and meeting people, so I go. And I chat to them, and they had been telling me after Christmas of the goings on. In particular, how after Kath stood down because she didn't want the humiliation of being voted out. I don't blame her. She didn't want the humiliation. What I found really strange at the time was BRIAN HOBIN took on the mantle of party leader as well as chairman. Took on the chairperson of the party as well as the leader inside the council chamber. I found that strange. But hey, it's not my rodeo. I didn't comment, I didn't say anything negative. I only mentioned checks and balances. Always checks and balances. You need you need a fresh set of eyes. I'd do it in my own team. The people I valued the most in my own teams were the ones who challenged me the most. We wanted the same thing, and it worked because we wanted the same thing. And you need that. In any team, you need that. And then they mentioned that they were having some sort of selection panel. I said, okay, that's good. And he said all the candidates were up. What was put forward was two options. One option was the sitting councillors automatically are selected, and you just have a panel for one, or everyone's got to be selected. Now, I can only share my own opinions based upon my own experiences. And my experience and my position, it's not my experience, my position is you should be selected. By the way, I have no say in what took place in Failsworth. I'm just sharing my position. You should be selected. You should go before your members, present, and if anyone else wants to challenge you, they should also present, and there should be a vote. It doesn't matter if you're a sitting councillor. There should be a vote. And that's democracy. The Home Secretary faced the selection panel this week before she could be the candidate. And in Oldham, my friends in the Asian communities will tell you why everything has been falling apart is because the Labour Party have suspended the local branches and have prevented the selection of candidates. So the likes of Abdul Jabbar get to stand without a vote. Arud Shah was imposed on St Mary's without a vote. That's not democracy. So I applauded the Failsworth Independents. Mark, Kath, Lucia, Sandra, Brian, Neil, that they were putting themselves up for a vote. And that's where it all started to go wrong. The way these votes are meant to happen is that a meeting is called, a selection panel meeting is called, and all the members are invited. And members who are invited, you can't just join the week before, because joining the week before is something called entryism. People do it to manipulate the vote. So you have a cut-off point. It's usually the date of the last election. So the cut-off point for membership should have been the 1st of May or the 5th of May 2022. But it wasn't. And people up to mischief were allowed to join just before to try and manipulate the vote. Tell me if I'm speaking out of turn. I know the Failsworth Independents are listening to this, the same as Mark and Kath and all the others. I'm simply providing my analysis of what took place. The second problem with that selection panel was that the vote did not take place at the meeting. Ordinarily, what would happen, you turn up to the meeting, ask my Labour Party colleagues, ask my Conservative colleagues or my Lib Dem colleagues. The norm is you would turn up to the meeting. Those who had been nominated or been nominated or wanted to stand again would stand and do a presentation, one after the other. And there'd be some sort of secret vote of the members who've decided to turn up there and then. They'd have ballot papers, they'd vote. And it would be announced there and then. The Failsworth Independents didn't do that. I don't know why they didn't do that. They didn't do that. They decided to have that meeting and then have some form of online process, basically postal votes. Some sort of postal vote system. Now, the problem with that is those postal votes, those online votes can be manipulated. And to make matters worse, the voting link wasn't sent out to all the members. And there was shenanigans going on. Political shenanigans because one side had split with the other. The East had fallen out with the West. And it centres around CAF. And it centres also around the way they do politics. And both sides have their unique way of doing politics and both has a value. And I'll get to that in a moment. But the consequence of the vote, I think it was a week afterwards or something, was that Mark and Sandra got deselected. Mark and Sandra got deselected. I got a phone call from Mark. I turned up to Morrison's Cafe. I said to him by coincidence, and it was by coincidence, I'd arranged to meet Dean and David there. And when I turned up, he was there with Kath. So when I tried to tell Kath to shut up for a moment so I could try and understand what had gone on. Never mind. And my advice, there and then, to Mark Wilkinson was, Mark, have you spoken with Brian? I urge you to pick up the phone and speak to Brian. Text him now if you're not going to speak to him. Facilitate a meeting. Facilitate a meeting and see how this can be resolved. And they'd fallen out. By now they'd fallen out and trust had gone. This happens in relationships. I've seen it many a time with far worse consequences, by the way, than an election result in Failsworth. I've seen it where people have killed each other and hundreds, thousands have died as a consequence. So I know where this can go and I know how to resolve this. And you always resolve this by talking, facilitating, mediating. You once family. You are family. And you've fallen out. And you feel that hurt more because of how close you were. So I facilitated an initial meeting between Brian and Mark. Both agreed. I dropped my daughter off early. And I say that because I want to demonstrate how much I value these people and how much I value all of Failsworth. How my time with my child is very limited. Nonetheless, I dropped her off early and I drove to Failsworth to Brian's new pub. Now, I've heard lots of shouting and screaming when whispering about Brian's new venture. I have no interest. I don't think he's done anything untoward, and I liked his pub. I commented on how nice it was, and I wished him well, and I do wish him well. Mark was there. We waited for Brian. Brian's wife had been in hospital, so the meeting had been put back a couple of times, or by the time we could arrange it, it wasn't as early as I'd wanted it to be. But his wife's in hospital. His father had recently died and his funeral had been a couple of days earlier, so I understood. I said to Mark and his team, you need to wait. He needs to bury his father first, and he needs to get his wife out of hospital. And Mark, to his due, understood that, accepted it, and we had a frank, honest, and decent conversation where we agreed, the pair of them agreed, that they needed to resolve this. It was in no one's interest to see a civil war break out between the two factions in Failsworth. And Brian was going to go back and speak to his team. We facilitated another meeting, or there was another meeting then being held. In between that, we had the meal at the Milan. Brian and his team turned up. Mark and his team turned up, and it was amicable. It was decent. And I'm pleased they all came. And the aspiration was that we rerun the vote because of the irregularities in the process. I think that would have been fair and would have put an end to it. Because the secretary, the woman from the Failsworth Independent Party, immediately after the vote resigned. BRIAN HOBIN then contacted me, and at this point I'm thinking it's resolved. Or they've worked it out. I've got them talking. They don't need me. And I'm not, I've got enough on my plate. Mark Wilkinson told me they were having a meeting to agree what moving forward would be like. BRIAN HOBIN then contacted me, of his own volition, asking me if I could attend and facilitate a meeting at Failsworth Town Hall. I contacted Mark to let him know I'd been invited to facilitate and would he be okay with that. Then I contacted Brian and said, okay, fine, Brian, happy to facilitate the meeting. At that meeting was BRIAN HOBIN, Lucia, Jane, Neil, another young man, a name I forget, my apologies. In fact, the comedy in that meeting was Brian kept forgetting his name as well. And of course, on the other side was Mark, Sandra, and Dean, and a man called Alan, who'd been selected and wanted to stand. And what we wanted to get to then, it was a tense meeting. There's clearly animosity between Neil and Mark Wilkinson. Neil, it was the first time I ever met him. I shook his hand. I have no issue with Neil Hindle. He'll tell you he has no issue with me. Lucia I've met a couple of times, and Lucia I've met one time since. I was at the Civic Centre with Warren getting his papers in and waiting for Amoy to turn up. Lucia pulled up in a car, gave her a hug, and we had a chat. She'll tell you herself. Thank you, David. Alan Brady. And this is what, to cut the long and short of it, this was what was agreed. And it was agreed. I did not make this up. And I have no reason to make this up. I think I'm very clear. I think it's coming across very clear. I am on everyone's side. This is what was agreed by everyone in that room. Sandra and Mark Wilkinson, Sandra Ball and Mark Wilkinson, and Sandra's a lovely lady, by the way. I've only met her a couple of times, but I think, I'd have Sandra on my team every day. Sandra and Mark agreed to resign from the Failsworth Independent Party. I would hold the resignation letters and pass them over to Mark on the Monday night when the deadline for election for the nomination of papers was a Tuesday last week. And in return, also, what Mark and Sandra and Kath's team essentially, remember Kath is the one who mobilised all of this. What they would do is stick to Failsworth West, and they would have 3 candidates in Failsworth West as independents. Mark Wilkinson, Sandra Ball, and Alan Brady. There was no doubt they'd get elected because the Failsworth Independent Party would not put up candidates in Failsworth West. And in return, Mark and his team would not only not put up candidates in Failsworth East, they would also support the Failsworth Independent Party because it was in no one's interest for this civil war to play out or for the vote to be split. So an agreement, you stay there, we stay here, and also we remain positive about each other. We've split, but we remain positive about each other. And observing everyone there, it was very clear to me why they'd split. It wasn't necessarily because one group had done one thing wrong and the other had done one thing right. They're just 2 different types of political parties. Mark, Sandra, and the team on the West are more grassroots. They'll roll their sleeves up, they'll get involved in stuff, and they want to get things done directly. Brian, Neil, Lucia are more strategic. And they want to try and work with the council to deliver outcomes. I think you need a bit of both in a team, but clearly a bit of both wasn't on the agenda for either of them. And of course, there are personalities involved. There are always personalities involved. So that was the agreement. You stick to one side, we stick to that, and we keep the news out. We do not air our dirty laundry in public. There'd already been some sort of stupid row with Neil Hindle's wife and Lucia and someone else on Facebook that people have been laughing and sniggering at. And those who want to cause all of us harm had taken great joy in it. And some idiot had blocked or taken over BRIAN HOBIN's Facebook account, councillor Facebook account. And Mark promised to go and fix that, find out who it was and get it handed back to him. These people do no one any. They have no help whatsoever. Oh, we'll do this, we'll do that. You've seen them all in the playground. Unfortunately, it doesn't change when you become an adult. And I don't care that you say this from behind an anonymous account. I find it disrespectful. I've met Lucia multiple times, and I think she does have personality. I think she's a decent young woman, and she's on a learning journey. The same as everyone else. Every one of us is on a journey. Go and ask the people go and ask Mark in Shaw how hard it's been to find candidates. People brave enough to come forward. Go and ask Maggie in Royton, the Royton Independents. Even go and ask Paul Eric and his Proud Of team or the Oldham Borough Independents how hard it is to find people and then nurture people who aren't cranks. So now I'm not going to have a bad word said about Lucia here. I think it's unfair. You stick to yours, we'll stick to ours. Raja, keep hold of the resignations and hand them over on Monday. Because on Tuesday, when the nominations are announced, what we agree to see is on Failsworth West, nothing but 3 independent candidates, Mark, Sandra and Alan Brady. And in Failsworth East, we see the Failsworth Independent candidates and no one else messing around from the West, putting up candidates there to split the vote. So BRIAN HOBIN, Neil Hindle and Lucia. Tell me if I'm lying, Brian. Or Mark. You were both in that meeting. Neil, Lucia, Sandra. Jane Casanelli was in that meeting. Tell me if I'm lying. On Monday, BRIAN HOBIN contacted me, asking me for the resignations, which I had. I contacted Mark Wilkinson, told him I was passing over the resignations as agreed, and sent them across to BRIAN HOBIN. That's on the Monday night. BRIAN HOBIN contacted me. On the Sunday, on the Tuesday, when the nominations had closed, I knew about 5 o'clock, give or take, the council would produce a list of candidates. I went through them, laughed at the 17 at Coldest and the whole host of independents there. Sarud Shah in St Mary's. Chuckled to myself at Warren Bates in Chadderton South and thought, yeah. Here's Coldest, you can see. Failsworth East, you can see. 3 Failsworth independent candidates, not a single independent candidate to in any way split the vote. So Mark and his team, as far as I was concerned, had honoured their agreement. The resignations had been in, They left the Failsworth Independent Party as agreed, and none of their team had got involved in Failsworth East. And neither Mark nor Sandra or Alan Brady had said anything publicly bad about the Failsworth Independent Party. The Labour Party had put up only 2 candidates, you can see, which shows how weak they were. And they didn't think they were going to win there. One of which is Fazlul Haq, an Asian guy, no chance. I don't mean it in a racist way. Fazlul is a councillor, or ex-councillor, from Chadderton Central. Chadderton North it was at the time. He was deselected. So they parachuted him in. So they've got no chance there. At Failsworth West, I see the name Jane Casanelli, Failsworth Independents. I'm not going to call BRIAN HOBIN a liar. I'm not going to call Jane Casanelli a liar. I think Jane will be a good councillor, wherever she stands. I know why I've got as far as I've got. It's because I've been honest. I've demonstrated integrity. And even though I struggle with it, leadership. BRIAN has let down. He can lie to me. He can manipulate me. It makes no difference. People have done it all their lives and they'll continue to do it. It's fine. But BRIAN took off me, the night before the deadline, the resignation letters as agreed. He said nothing about the Failsworth Independent Party reneging on their agreement. The Failsworth Independent Party have reneged on the agreement, and Jane was in that meeting with me. I've only met her twice. I think she's a decent woman, but Jane, you were in that meeting with me. They say politics is a dirty game, which is why when we started this journey together, I chuckled to you, and I'm laughing at myself now because I'm standing as a candidate to be MP. But I chuckle and say, I told my daughter as a baby, clearly because she didn't understand a word of it, that I'd rather she grow up to be a prostitute than a politician. But there are consequences here that I don't believe BRIAN and his team have fought through. Not just consequences in Failsworth, but consequences elsewhere. I think, and for those of you who've asked, if I lived in Failsworth East, I would go and vote for BRIAN HOBIN, I would vote for Neil Hindle, and I would also vote for Lucia. Because I believe in the independent movement and I know the alternative is worse. Honestly, the alternative is worse. Which is why I help facilitate these meetings. If I lived in Failsworth West, I think without a doubt, Mark Wilkinson and Sandra have demonstrated how brilliant we want our, councillors they are, and how we want our representatives to be. Selfless and act with integrity and decency. I think both of them will get elected without a shadow of a doubt. But I don't think BRIAN HOBIN or his team have fought this through. First thing is, say Jane does get elected as the third candidate and Alan Brady doesn't. Say Jane does get elected. Or the alternative is the vote is split between Jane and Alan and the Labour candidate gets in. Peter Davis was only 300 votes behind. The Labour Party's 900 votes will be the Labour Party's 900 votes, if not more this time. So I think Sandra and Mark will get over the line. Alan might get elected. Jane might get elected. Or Jane and Alan might split the vote and Peter Davis get elected. But say Jane does get elected. She'll come last. She'll come third, yeah? Has Brian thought it through? But the last placed, the third candidate, the one selected with the least votes, is up for re-election again next year. That's right, they're up for re-election again next year. It's the year after, that's the fallow year, where there's no election. So in May 2024, across all 20 wards, the people who were elected, the candidates who were elected as councillors in third position are all up for re-election. What do you think will also happen in Failsworth East next year? What do you think Kath will do? What do you think David will do? Or Dean do? Dean was in that meeting with me. Dean's a decent lad. He came to that meeting whilst he was nursing his ex-wife who was dying in his house. What do you think will happen in the East? It'll be all-out civil war across both. But worse than that, what do you think will happen in the council chamber come May? When Brian and his team vote one way, Mark and Sandra will vote the other. It's a given. It's a given. If we get any other independents over the line, what do you think they are? What space do you think they are entering? Some sort of united independent space? No. We're our leaders, our independent leaders, led by you. As leader of the Failsworth Independents, you are our leader in the council chamber. Your actions are inexcusable, not to me, but to Failsworth and the wider town. They are inexcusable, Brian. And I say that not to criticise you or attack you, but the people who respect you, irrespective of what you do to me, the people who respect you and value you, if they can't hold you up and say what you've done is wrong, then no one can. You took those resignation letters off me knowing what you were going to do, or what you had already done. Have you thought through the consequences? For Jane, who I think would make a brilliant council, but now she's going to be public enemy number one in that area. And what for? A year of chaos? Civil war in the council chamber? The other independents who enter that space looking at you thinking, what on earth is going on here? And we're having to pick a side? Amongst the independents, never mind fight the common enemy. It's poor. We agreed in that space. We agreed. BRIAN has an opportunity, and the Failsworth Independents have an opportunity. Candidates can be removed by Tuesday. Within 7 days, candidates can step down. I repeat it all the time. We all make mistakes and we continue to make mistakes. It's what we do after the mistakes. And here we have a window of opportunity. If Jane does not step down, if BRIAN and that doesn't happen, and she's not stood as an independent, she stood as the Failsworth Independents, as that party. I don't just fear what will happen at this election. I fear for the consequences in the council chamber over the next 12 months and what will happen the year after. And you know what will happen the year after? Who benefits from this the most? It's not BRIAN HOBIN. It's not Neil Hindle. It's definitely not Lucia or Mark or Sandra or anyone else in Failsworth. It's the Labour Party that benefit the most because they'll just come up through the middle and re-establish themselves. And if you're a voter in Failsworth, would you blame people for going back to the Labour Party after this? Whilst I'm here, let me show you something else that we managed to pull off. I want to take you to Royton North. Sorry, Royton South. I want to take you to Royton South, where we've got the Royton Independents standing, and so these are their names. We've got Jade Hughes, we've got Maggie Hurley, and we've got Darren Radcliffe. Anthony Prince, he does what he does. He'll get his usual 200 votes, and I have no idea who, for future's sake, Freedom Alliance is. But the three independents, the Royton Independents we've been supporting are Jade, Maggie and Darren. Do you see what we've done there and what we've negotiated there and what we've managed to pull off in the background? Have a look at Royton South. What don't you see? There is not a single Conservative candidate in Royton South. We've convinced the Conservatives and they haven't put up a candidate. They got 1,000 votes there last time and 1,000 votes the year before. They've cleared the way for the Royton Independents to take out Amanda Chadderton and Barrelgate Bashforth and his wife Marie. Can you see how much work is going on and what we are doing to try and take back our towns from this corrupt administration? And what have you done? What have you gone and done in Failsworth? Stand your candidate down, BRIAN. Let me facilitate a meeting between all of you. Get all 6 of you over the line and try and make sure all 6 of you work together post-May. Otherwise, we all lose. Every one of us. With leadership comes responsibility. It's always been the case. That's exactly what I mean. My apologies, David. Did I say something else? Stand your candidate down, Brian. Fix this because you're fortunate. You still have a chance to fix this. And indeed, Jane, who's very articulate, very competent. I've met her 2 or 3 times, and I think she'd be a brilliant counsellor. But not this way, Jane. You were in that same meeting I was. Just over 3 weeks to the election. No, David, you'd have to thank me for telling the truth because I know no other way. It's cost me. My entire life it's cost me. Three weeks to the elections. I don't think it'll be the last twist or turn. We will remain resolute. We will remain consistent. We will remain true to who we are and try and support as many of the independents as possible. And if not in the wards where we can't support independents, we will support the opposition parties that have the best chance of ousting Labour Party councillors. If you find value in these transmissions, once again, I urge you to take out a subscription. I'm losing subscribers, paid subscribers, because all of my work is for free. I was contacted. Another day, another time. If you find value in my work, please, if you can, buy me a coffee, take out the subscriptions. If someone else was going to do this work, they would have done it by now, and I wouldn't envy them at all. It's Bank Holiday Monday, it's Easter Monday. I am now going to meet a barrister to borrow his time for free for other matters where I'm being sued and stuff. For those of you new to me, my name is Miah, and for my sins, Oldham is my home, and each and every one of you I consider to be my family. Take care.
Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them.